Hello and welcome to the Culturel Irlandais conversation between writers Colum McCann and Dara McKeown. This conversation marks the launch of the French translation by Clément Baude of Colum's novel Apeirogon, published by Belfond. And I welcome our friends and colleagues from Belfond who partner us on this evening's conversation. So I'm in the salle de conférence of the Centre Culturel Irlandais with Colum zooming in from New York City, from Manhattan, and Dara from West Clare, joining a live audience, and we will have time for questions from the audience. This conversation will be recorded and shared online, and I would like to acknowledge the financial support of Culture Ireland. So I'm now going to hand over to Dara McKeown, who will introduce Colum. And Dara has worked as a theatre director for many years and is now working on his second novel, which is partly set in Northern Ireland. His first novel, All That Is Solid Melts into Thin Air. It was also published by Belfond in French. Of this novel, Colum McCann wrote, "Brilliantly imagined, exhilarating in its sweep, McKeown creates a thrilling appearance of ease while he delves deep and forges new territory for the contemporary novel. Daring, generous, and beautifully written. All That Is Solid Melts into Air marks the beginning of a truly significant career. I cannot say it loud enough, McKeown is here to stay." And on that note, there is McKeown just above you on our Zoom screen. And I'm going to hand over to Dara now. Thank you, Dara.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Sorry that we can't be there. I have a very weird, like, Eurovision vibe here that I'm calling in from Ireland, the votes of the Irish jury. Yeah, sorry that we can't be there, but we're we're both delighted for the opportunity to be able to do this. And I suppose for me, I've read Colum's book. I actually read it in draft as he was writing it, and I've since read it since it was published, but I haven't really had a chance to sit down with him and talk it through. So it's a nice opportunity for me to do that, but also just to see your faces and reconnect with the Irish Centre, which is a place that I spend an awful lot of time in, and I think does amazing work. So I'm not that used to the old the Zoom situation. I've done a couple of Spanish classes on it, but haven't hosted anything on it. So I've written an introduction, which we'll do. So the quick facts. Colum McCann is one of our most widely read, internationally lauded novelists. He's a professor in Hunter College, New York. He's the co-founder of a charity called Narrator, which brings people together from all across the globe to enact a very simple ritual, that of sharing each other's stories. He's published 3 collections of short stories and 7 novels, the latest of which, Apeirogon, a mathematical word for a geometric shape with a countably infinite number of sides. We're going to be talking about that this evening. He's been awarded the International Dublin Impact Prize. He's a Chevalier des Arts et Lettres from the French government. He has an election to the Irish Arts Academy, several European awards, the 2000 Best Foreign Novel Award in China, an Oscar nomination. In 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of the Arts. His work has been published in over 40 languages. He's also the recipient of the US National Book Award. I first read a book of Colum's when I was 23. I was living in Connemara, which ironically is not that far away from where I am right now. It was pretty much at the very, very end tip of the west of Ireland. It was a wild land, and it was I lived in a cottage on a tiny peninsula that would get cut off from the mainland in heavy storms. There was just one little road, 2 stone walls to the side, and waves each side. So I remember one of those abandoned days. I lit a fire, I curled up with a book, and I listened to the rain outside. The book was Dancer, Colum's fictional biography of Nureyev. And when I finished it, my conception of Irish literature had changed. Here was someone who wasn't writing about priests or dance halls or farm kitchens or emigration, at least not in the Irish sense. He was a guy from Dublin, from Cornell's Court, not even one of the interesting parts, who had the audacity to write about one of the major cultural figures of the century. And not just write about, inhabit. My favorite character of his from that novel, and possibly actually from his entire output, is a man called Tom Ashworth. Tom Ashworth is a shoemaker in London whose favorite and most famous client is the ballerina Margot Fonteyn. Tom is small in stature and an avid football fan, so he's made himself a pair of brogues with a very high heel so that he can stand in the terraces and watch Arsenal on a Saturday afternoon. and keep account of the football match that's going in front of him. As I've got to know Colum as a reader and as a friend, it's this characteristic of his that I've got to enjoy time and time again. Amid the swirl of ambition that's inherent in almost everything he does, there's also time and more time and more time, an almost endless supply of time for the small voices, the small details, the innocuous, simple elements that make up a person and a life. And thinking about Apeirogon, he's managed to take this trick, although trick is not the right word, perhaps to say he's managed to enact this talent of his upon a large, large canvas. He's telling the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the lives of two very real, very vibrant men, but also through the patterns of frigate birds in flight, of the Dead Sea strolls, of the detritus and effluvia of a war-torn place. All of these stories, details, tucked into place like the prayer slips that are slid into the cracks of the Western Wall, each revealing in its detail, each waiting for rediscovery. Colum McCann, very welcome to Paris.
Dara McKeown, it's so good to see you, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, and greetings to everyone there in that wonderful building and that wonderful city, and everyone who's going to come on online. I've got to tell you that meeting Dara was one of the high points of my teaching career at first, and then just became one of the high points of my life. We became fast friends. We've worked with one another, sort of braided together in literary terms, and I have read his work, and he has read mine. I admire his work tremendously. I can't wait for the for the new novel to come along, and to get a chance to just come in here and sit and chat with you in this virtual room. It's kind of amazing, really, when you think about how we are, triangulated. And you're there in part of my heart home, which is the west of Ireland. I'm here in part of your heart home, which is New York City, where you lived for a while. And both of us have spent a good amount of time in Paris. So here we are. It's good to be here.
Across the globe. We did one of these we did a small version of one of these a couple of years ago when your Letters to a Young Writer came out. Had a brief chat. I was kind of called in last minute. The MC didn't show up or got his dates mixed up or whatever. But I remember, I kind of want to start with that a little bit, because you said something very surprising in the introduction to that a couple of years ago, where you talked about your dad. So Colum's dad was Sean McCann, who was a journalist with the Irish Press and was very involved in encouraging new Irish writing. I want to say in the 60s and 70s, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Thing that I didn't realize was that writers would often call to his door. So they'd knock on the door at middle of the night, late in the evening, Saturdays, Fridays. And writers like Brendan Behan, who would be looking for an advance or looking for a payment, or, just needing a chat or needing a bit of money in their pocket. And I've thought about that since, because part of me wonders how much of an advantage of that is for you as a writer. And part of me wonders how much of a disadvantage of that is, because I think the thing that people always struggle with, I was going to say debut writers, and I think that it was particularly true for me writing my debut novel, but in general, we're all looking for permission. Like, we're all looking for permission to be writers, permission to write, permission to have your voice, spoken aloud, to the world. And I suppose one of the key elements of writing is allowing yourself to have that permission and giving yourself that permission. So when I was writing, my idea of writers were these kind of demigods. Like, I remember Seamus Heaney dying, and it was basically a state funeral in Ireland. Like, we pretty much had a state funeral for Seamus Heaney. So, they kind of exist in this very elevated space. And I think that held me back for a lot of years was thinking that I had any right to be somewhere included on that, on that page or within those names. But you're meeting these people as living, breathing, very failed or flawed human beings. Did that affect you as a kid? Did that make you go, oh, that's real and I can do that? Or did that make you go, oh my God, that's a whole different ballgame that I can't even reach?
Yeah, I've very seldom talked about this, but basically, I'd get a clip on the ear and get told away to go away from the from the front door. What would happen is my father was features editor in the evening press, and he paid people quite well, and he was one of the few editors in town who would pay writers in advance, whether it be Con Houlihan or Ben Kiley, and indeed Brendan Behan, or any number of writers who needed a few bob. Generally, they needed a few bob when they were in a particular state of, let's say, being overserved. And the taxi would be waiting at the front gate of our house. With the doorbell would ring. My dad would go out, he'd reach into his pocket, give someone like a tenner or 20 quid at the time. And you could almost hear the taxi sloshing off down the street towards the Horse and Hound or wherever it happened to be. But that was my father's love of writers and writing. And for me, it was just normal. And then he would get out in his writing shed at the side of the house. We lived in basically a 4-bedroom suburban house, as you say, in boring old, Clonkeen Road, Dean's Grange. I went to school in Foxrock. The most pasty white sort of idea, but it wasn't that way. It was so much more textured, and our house was filled with books, and the sound of growing up was the click clack of the typewriter outside. And I'll tell you this. My dad had been a professional soccer player, been a goalkeeper, second string for Charlton Athletic, never really made it. Began writing about football, then came back to Ireland. And one of the things he did was he wrote children's soccer books. And he would bring the pages to me. He'd write these books inside 2-3 weeks. He'd bring the pages to me at the age of 8 and 9 and ask me to read them. And then I remember a couple of years later, when one of the first books came out, Goals for Glory, I was maybe 9 years old. Mr. Kells, the teacher in St. Bridget's National School, read aloud Goals for Glory on 4 successive Friday afternoons. That was our treat. And I will never forget, at the end of the book, the fellow in front of me, Christopher Howlett, with a big shock of red hair on him, jumping up out of his seat and celebrating the goal that Georgie Good had just scored. And I remember thinking, well, that's very odd, because I know that goal was actually scored in my father's head, in my father's shed, in my own house, just down the road. And here it is now, it's suddenly elsewhere. And I think that was probably my first unconscious, celebration of the power of literature. I had a few moments like that. They were often with my father. But I also have to say that my mother, who's still alive and well, in Clonkeen Road, was also a very powerful figure for me, in the sense that, I would come home for school in the afternoon. I went to Clonkeen College, and I would sit and have lunch with her. And so for about half an hour to 45 minutes every single day in all of my teenage years, I got to sit and chat with her, which didn't seem strange at the time, but now seems like sort of a miraculous thing. And who knows where our influences are, but I did know from an early age that I wanted to be a journalist. I never knew that I wanted to be, a fiction writer. But here's the rub: I don't see too much difference between good journalism and good poetry and good prose writing. And I'll finish with this. I remember Con Houlihan from the Evening Press. He was a sports writer for the Evening Press. A beautiful writer, writing from all around the world about football, about horse racing, about literature. And he could do on any given day what some of the best prose stylists in the world happen to do. So I grew up in the in and around newspapers and in and around the literary world, but it never seemed strange or foreign to me. And lastly, Ben Kiley. Ben Kiley, I went to his house at the age of 16, and he sat me down and he said, "You can be a writer. This is what it's like." And he actually took me out, and I had one of my first pints with Ben Kiley.
Did you go to his house with the express question of that in mind? Yeah, as a mentor, yeah.
Yeah,
And
well,
have
not
to
not even
stack.
so much as a mentor. I'd read Ball of Malt and Madame Butterfly on my father's advice, and just like you, I thought, well, this is not the literature that I've ever seen before. You know, this is that was set in Dublin, but it seemed like a Dublin that it was like listening to Van Morrison. You know, and it
Yeah.
opened up all the windows. It was incredible. So I just wanted to meet him and shake his hand and say hello. And he opened the door at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, still in his pajamas. He was writing away, and then he got dressed, and we took the shopping bags and walked down the Morehampton Road, and I chatted away with him, and that was one of my first introductions to the literary world. Benedict Kiley, for people who haven't read him, just read a novel called Prox Opera, which is one of the great novels about Ireland, Northern Ireland, and it's short and beautiful.
I haven't read it. I got to stick it on the list. Did he? So, what was it in you that made him go, "Yeah, you can be a writer"? Was he being encouraging? Do you think that there was a hunger in there? Like, did he see something? Did you bring your work with you?
I brought my work with me. I showed him some really bad adolescent stories, and he encouraged me. And then when I went to the States at the age of 21, I sat down to try and write, and I took a bicycle across the United States when I couldn't write anything, but I did write my first book at the age of 23. And I sent it to Ben Kiley, and Ben Kiley sent me a letter back encouraging me. God bless him. I mean, it was shite. I mean, it was absolutely shite. But he encouraged me, and he sent it on to his agent at that time, and I got encouraging letters back. But I was very lucky that I didn't get published at the age of 23. In fact, I have 2 novels in the drawer. And they will never, ever, ever see the light of day. But I think I was writing myself out of my fiction, Dara, if you know what I mean. I wasn't, those early novels were very much about myself. There was a character who went on the road on a bicycle in the United States and all these sort of things. And they failed miserably, but they gave me a chance to train, because, I don't know how you feel about this, but do you feel that you got to be an athlete when it comes to writing books?
Less so than I used to. I think I've now begun to understand that it's a walk. It's less intense pace, but it's more consistency. And all of those tropes and cliches apply, that it's not really about the destination, it is about the journey. And that's really true. That I found I've become a lot more consistent and put less pressure on myself. And actually the work has improved the more I treat it as a walk, and just allow that kind of pace to emerge rather than force it.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're kind of talking about your background and we will get into the novel, but it's interesting because I feel like we haven't talked about it that much, and I haven't actually really heard you talk about it that much. So sitting here in County Clare, and maybe it's just the particular kind of focus I have at the moment, but I'm hanging around with all of these people who play amazing traditional music. They're so good at it. And it's in Milltown Malbay is just down the road, which is kind of the heartbed of like Irish fiddle, or certainly like, West Clare fiddle. And there's a tradition in that families play music together. The kids are brought in, on a Sunday afternoon, they're given a fiddle. They don't take up too much space, and they kind of keep the volume low, but they're involved in that kind of wave of music really early on. And it sounds a little bit like that actually was true for you in terms of literature, which I think is very rare. Certainly in an Irish context, like I can think of some English writers, but not that many Irish writers who are kind of brought in and allowed to dip their feet into that wave. Did your dad give you pointers in terms of technique? Like, did you, other than the act of doing, I suppose if I'm to like put the analogy beside each other, did he teach you how to play the instrument?
It's a great question. I gotta say, yes, in certain ways, but I also have to give massive amounts of credit to my teachers in school, Mr. O'Connell, Mr. Kells, all the teachers that I had. And I truly believe that more and more and more that you know, when we talk about a functioning democracy, when we talk about people who are pushing the edges and the parameters and preparing society for what it's going to be, it is our teachers that you know, I lean towards. I remember them talking to me and you know, giving me bad marks on certain essays that I did, but also another essay that I did once. I wrote about my grandfather, who I'd only met once, who was, you know, more or less, you know, a crazy character living in London, and I'd gone over to London with my father to meet him. And being allowed to read that essay out in school, I think it was fifth class, and you know, the love in Ireland for the, you know, for the word, the love that we had for poetry. I mean, I was studying Gerard Manley Hopkins when I was 11 and 12, and Dylan Thomas, and you know, being allowed that and pushed to a certain point. I'm not so sure we're pushed quite as much anymore. But when I think of you know, the teachers, yes, my father is there, and yes, the Ben Kileys of the world are there, but also it's the you know, the teachers who lay the groundwork. It's sort of random and crowdsourced, you know, I think that's something that we've got to talk about, certainly when we talk about, you know, what's happening, say, in the United States, the way education is sort of going down the drain, that we need to celebrate our teachers so much more. And just in relation to your question too, can I tell you that the west of Ireland meant a lot to me. We went there on holidays, yeah, and we went down to Lahinch, and we went to Achill Island. I did all that sort of stuff, you know, but I also spent a few months working at the Connacht Telegraph in Castlebar in County Mayo. And there I was a cub reporter. And I was actually even playing football. And I even played for the Castlebar Mitchells a couple of games. And I had to report on the matches that I played in. McCann gets the ball on the left wing.
McCann stars again.
No, far from
it. Were you nervous as a cub reporter? Were you good at walking into like situations and starting asking?
I was
like,
incredibly not nervous. I was such a little snot. I mean, I started doing this stuff when I was 12 and 13. I was working for the Irish Press and the Irish Indo. I figured out a way to go to the local football matches like Tech, Bray Wanderers, before they were in the Premier League in Ireland. You know, I would go to these matches and write paragraphs like 100, 200 words and phone them in, and you know, so I'd go up to the managers and they must have looked at me, and literally I was 12, 13 years old, and said, who is this kid, and why is he writing about my football team? So I didn't have a problem, and that sort of helped me as I went along. One of my first journalistic things was I did an investigation into heroin use and child battery in Dublin. I actually won an award for a series of investigations I did for the press. But
and that's just knocking on doors. That's just
that was knocking on doors. That was me going out to Ballyfermot and places like that, and you know, having to look around and see what a different world it happened to be. People forget that Ireland in the 70s was you know, this was, well, actually late 70s, early 80s when I was doing this stuff. It was tough. You know, we had a large heroin epidemic. There was, you know, and you know, I came basically from Fox Rock, from Black Rock, and I was going out on my own to these places, and but I've always liked people. I've always liked talking to people. I've always liked a certain sense of danger lurking around the corner. So that was one of the things. You know, you become aware of it afterwards, years and years and years afterwards. But at the time, you just think, oh, you know, I got a pit in my stomach. I don't know how this is going to go today. But years later, you realize that that's what shapes you.
Totally, yeah. And crossing the threshold. I feel like crossing the threshold into someone else's experience. And like a thing that I do a lot is travel. And I, in recent years, as I've got to know you, occasionally I'll be in like some mad place and think of you, because I'm certainly like, I know what that situation is, to be completely vulnerable. it's very hard actually, and I don't say this as a complaint, it's more as an observation. You know, white man from a rich country, it's not often that you're really truly vulnerable.
Right.
I do find that travel makes you that, because occasionally you'll find yourself in situations where you're going, I don't speak the language. I'm completely placing all of my trust in you. You can pretty much do anything you want to me, but I'm looking in the eye and I know that you're going to like bring me to a safe place.
That's right.
Well, or you're not going to rip me off.
There's something about, and I'm not sure what it is, and maybe people in the audience know what it is, but there is definitely something about being Irish that allows us a chance to get into other people's experience. I kind of don't want to know what sort of magic it is, but like when I was writing a novel called Zoli, I went to the Romani camps, pejoratively the gypsy camps in Slovakia, and I didn't have a word of Romani. I had a Slovakian translator, but he left because he was scared of staying overnight in the camps, and I sat with these people and we communicated by singing, and as you know, Dara, I do sing, but I can't. So I would sit around and they'd sing a song.
Not traditional music family.
Yeah. But you know, I'd sit around and sing a song, and somehow it was all okay. But also, I mean, it's how you look at people, and I think it's about entering in, and we've talked a little bit about this. It's entering into someone else's space with the humility that you know that you're going to learn something. You're not going to teach anybody. You're not going to plunder. You're not going to do any appropriation of any sort. You're there to sort of acknowledge that they're so much smarter than you happen to be, and you want to sort of engage in and celebrate that other culture. There's something uniquely Irish about that. I really believe so.
Yeah, I suppose I slightly have a theory on it, in that like we've never invaded anyone, and our reputation is to be good drinkers and good song, or
Didn't we plunder St. Patrick though?
didn't hit up a country. So yeah, I don't think I ever really realized how much of a passport that is until you're there, and suddenly people are racing of you.
Yeah.
Shall I get into it now? Let's get into it. You know what? Let's do your reading. Let's do your reading first, and then we'll start talking about Apeirogon.
Okay.
That's a good transition.
Well, okay, can we talk about the book first, and then I'll read a little bit, because then it will put this section in context, if you don't mind. So
I suppose I kind of want to take a few of the things that you've said and like draw them forward in your life. So you're talking about, at an early age, you're looking at your journalist dad who's writing fiction. You're seeing him in the shed, and then you're in your classroom and you're going, people are reacting to this like it's a real event, and yet I know that it's conjured up out of my dad's head. I feel like that's a road that you've walked, but I feel like it's kind of it's begun to transform into different stages. So broadly speaking, if we're looking at your work, you'll look at a book like Dancer, you'll look at a book like Zoli, where you fully immerse yourself in a fictional biography, which almost felt like autobiography. It's very close third person fiction, and we're getting a sense of probably a more detailed or more flesh and blood sense of a human life than a kind of academic biography would give you. It doesn't have that objectivity. It has a little bit of objectivity, but it's more subjective. I feel like in the last few years, you could almost say that your work has turned into kind of a documentary fiction. So thinking about Transatlantic with those sections of George Mitchell, and talking about the peace process. A story that I think, we haven't talked about it that much, but I feel is actually a really important part of your career, was that, what time is it where you are now? On 13 Ways of Looking. Because suddenly that's a very lean and very efficient way of telling a story, that you're ripping away quite a lot of the, I feel like as prose writers, we have so many notes at our disposal. Like there's kind of nothing that certainly a novel can't take. Short stories are a little bit different, but a novel can be as flabby as you want it to be, and it's fine. We have all the grace notes and all the tricks. And I feel like that was a point, a little bit in Transatlantic too, but I feel like that was a point where you began to rip all of those away, and you're just left with the pure lines pure ideas, pure detail, and allowing those kind of things to tell a story. So with the Apeirogon, I'm interested because I feel like you've taken that further. So there's not, you know, I suppose what I want to say is there's not a lot of bells and whistles in this book, even though it's a very complicated book and very intricate and very moving. You're not really going away and like, you know, writing these great swathes of prose. It's kind of, you're bringing it back to a journalistic kind of precision.
Right.
So I'm interested to know, is that a natural progression? Is that something that actually you're conscious of as you're doing? Is that something that you're aiming towards?
You know, the thing about it is, and I think we should talk about it more. You know, at some stage, I I don't think that writers are anywhere near as intelligent as readers think them to be. I think that my readers are much smarter than I am, and that they complete a book for me. But in the process, what I want is, I feel like, especially with Apeirogon, that I came in and I was a conductor, right? And you know, I was going into this hall that I'd never been in before. And I was going to meet these musicians who I had never really worked with before. And some of them had familiar things. Some of them had fiddles, and some of them were at the piano, and some of them were on the contrabass, and so on. And I was trying to get a music, to come together. But every now and then, at the far end of the hall, someone would break in, open the light, and they'd be carrying an instrument the like of which I'd never seen before, and I had to incorporate that in the music. Part of what was, big for me about writing Apeirogon is I was going into territory that I knew was extremely dangerous, that I knew that I would get critiqued for one way or the other, but I felt that I had to go in because I felt the power of the story, which is about two men, you know, who lose their daughters 10 years apart, and they become friends, and they say, we need to know each other. It was such a powerful story when I heard it, that I knew that I had to, at some stage, write it. I didn't know how to write it because I was confused. I was confused by what was Israel. I was confused by the history. I was confused about what was Palestine. I was confused by all these terms, and I knew I had to steep myself in it. And part of what the novel does is it acknowledges the confusion at the beginning. It tries to confuse the reader because it jumps from one place to the next. It jumps from Francois Mitterrand eating an ortolan to the history of weaponry, to this young girl walking down the street, to the flight patterns of birds. And in creating that confusion, I was hoping that the reader would then allow the confusion to happen for herself and say, okay, I'm confused. It's okay to be confused. I think so much of our problem nowadays is that, we don't allow the beauty of confusion. We don't allow the messiness of multitudes. We don't allow people to say, I don't know. We don't allow people, we have this disease of certainty about us. Mea culpa, I have to say. And what I wanted to do was go into this territory, go into the lives of Rami and Bassam, and say, this stuff is messy. We don't necessarily have, the easy answer. I can't say one state, two states, three states, four. What I can talk about is the territory of the human heart. And what I can talk about is how devastating it was for Bassam to get out of prison, spend time, forming a peace organization called Combatants for Peace. And 2 years after he has formed Combatants for Peace, which is, Palestinians and Israelis coming together, his daughter gets shot in the back of the head with a rubber bullet, and she dies. And then he has the force of beauty and courage and humility and decency to use that as a weapon for peace and that seems to me to be an astounding human story, and I wanted to try to get at that human story, and I'm not trying to be didactic here. That's why I say that my readers are the ones who come to the book, and then you take what you want from the symphony that I have created. And really, Dara, I mean, this was a culmination book for me. I think it marks the top of where I wanted to go to from Dancer, and I'm going to embark on something entirely new, next time around. Because for me, this was the book that I had wanted for a long time. Not to say that it's perfect in any manner or means. But for me, it was the one that I broke my heart over, and the one that I will never, ever forget. The process of writing it. And I have to say, I know we're sort of beaming through France. The French interpretation of the book and the way it has been treated has been sort of spectacular to me. I've always had a really good time in France, and I've been published there since the very beginning. But my French readers and my relationship with my publishing house, who's been with me the whole way along, Belfond, is pretty spectacular, and it keeps me going. So that's a long sort of circuitous way to say that my readers are incredibly important to me. And when I sit down to write, I do think about what sort of music it is that they're going to hear.
Maybe let's do the reading. I have like a bunch of questions, but let's do the reading.
Okay, so the book is told in 1,001 sections. I call them cantos or songs. It goes from 1 to 500, and then from 500 down to 1. Technically, the book could be read backwards and forwards, but that would go against chronological time. But I am interested in going against chronological time. And in this section, this to me was the most important section, because I finally realized who the narrator of the book was. And I'll tell you then after. I'm sure you'll get it as I read along. And basically, this is just a synopsis of the book. It's section 1001. Once upon a time, and not so long ago, and not so far away, Rami Elhanan, an Israeli, a Jew, a graphic artist, husband of Nurit, father of Elik and Guy and Yigal, father too of the late Smadar, travelled on his motorbike from the suburbs of Jerusalem to the Kremazon monastery in the mainly Christian town of Beit Jala, near Bethlehem, in the Judean hills, to meet with Bassam Aramin, a Palestinian, a Muslim, a former prisoner, an activist, born near Hebron, husband of Salwa, father of Arab and Areen and Muhammad and Ahmed and Iba, father too of the late Abir, 10 years old, shot dead by an unnamed Israeli border guard in East Jerusalem almost a decade after Rami's daughter, Smadar, 2 weeks away from 14, was killed in the western part of the city by 3 Palestinian suicide bombers, Bashar Sawala, Youssef Shuli, and Tawfiq Yassin, from the village of Asariya al-Shamaliya near Nablus in the West Bank, a place of intrigue to the listeners gathered in the red brick monastery, perched on the hillside in the mountains of the beloved, by the terraced vineyard, in the shadow of the wall, having come from as far apart as Belfast and Kyushu, Paris and North Carolina, Santiago and Brooklyn, Copenhagen and Terezin, on an ordinary day at the end of October, foggy, tinged with cold, to listen to the stories of Bassam and Rami, and to find within their stories another story, a song of songs, discovering themselves, you and me, in the stone-tiled chapel where we sit for hours, eager, hopeless, buoyed, confused, cynical, complicit, silent, our memories imploding, our synapses skipping in the gathering dark, remembering while listening all of those stories yet to be told. So, Dara, in that section, I have, obviously me, but I acknowledge, and maybe every book acknowledges this, I don't know, but I acknowledge that the reader is actually the narrator of the book. That was a big moment when I discovered that. And maybe that's true of every single book. When you read Ulysses, you become the narrator. When you read, All That Solid Melts into Air, you become the narrator. But for me, very specifically with this book, the reader has to become the storyteller and has to sit in that stone tile chapel. And once I discovered that, I knew it was a book that could go absolutely could go everywhere. There's a lot of mention of France and Mitterrand and that sort of thing. The suggestion is that one of the people sitting listening to Rami and Bassam's story is from Paris. Another one is from Belfast. But really, it's a book designed so that we, no matter where we happen to be, are part of the story, because that's the truth, man. I mean, you think about Jerusalem, the conjunction of like these three continents or three major religions. The nuclear energy that's there in that place. It belongs to all of it. All of us have a piece of ourselves in Jerusalem, and therefore all of us have a piece of ourselves in the stories of Abir and Smadar, and that's what I was going for. I wanted to capture that sort of explosive energy that also comes back in like a beating heart. To me, it was very important to have the book feel like a living, breathing thing.
How far into the writing of it were you before you figured that out?
2 years.
Okay.
2 years. Yeah. 2 years out of basically a 4-year process. And there were times I was going, God damn, who the F is who in the world is seriously, I was like, who's the narrator? Because I didn't want it to be me. That's so boring, and I didn't want it to be some sort of like omnipresent, force. I wanted it to be someone else. And for a while I thought, well, it's got to be a woman who's there in the monastery, or it's got to be someone, because here you have a book where you have a Jewish man traveling to a monastery in one morning, and then a Muslim man traveling from the monastery back to his place in Jericho. So you had Jewish, Muslim, Christian all there together. People tend to forget a lot about the incredible importance of the Christian tradition to Palestine in particular, and how much it has influenced where we happen to be right now.
There's something about, as you're talking, there's something about the process of sitting with something without trying to shape it, whether just like sitting in its presence. I mean, I'm kind of thinking in a bigger landscape and thinking about peace negotiation in general. Like that's really just about, it's really not about coming in with an agenda. It's really about sitting there and agreeing to sit there until it clicks. Like, I mean, I think you could say that about the Good Friday Agreement. There's a reason that George Mitchell put like he put a timeline on it, because he was like, we're gonna have to sit and stew until this thing resolves itself.
Right.
This book would have been this could have been a very dull and worthy book. They're incredible character, incredible people, and it's an extraordinary place. But you can arrive into writing about politics, even well-meaningly, and yet kill all of the, or not kill, but like sift away all of the kind of human complications and the randomness that happens by having a linear kind of agenda.
Yeah, and explanation kills it all, or explication kills it all. Vallejo talks about in mystery lies the truth, and a part of you as a novelist has to know that you can't explain things to people. You have to allow people to feel. The great job of literature is to confront the heartbreak of the world, not in statistics, not in facts and figures, not in philosophical outlines, but to make us feel it, to have the hair in the back of your I don't have any left anymore, but have the hair and then the back of your neck rise and to feel it, that chill along your arms. In that sense, I see literature as an act of non-violent resistance, so that when we go into places of difficulty and we start to tell stories, we allow people to experience what the heartbreak might be like, or even what the violence might be like. And yet the reader, even though he or she might be scarred in some way, it's a good scarring. It's an uncovering of things. And what you're saying and what you're so right about is it all comes down to the art of listening. It's not about telling, it's all about listening. And one of the things Mitchell did, he was called Iron Pants because he could sit for hours and hours in plenary after plenary after plenary and listen to people talk. And he gave them the dignity of allowing them to tell their story. Which is much of what my life is about, through a charity that you mentioned earlier, Narrative 4, where we get kids around the world to step into one another's shoes and listen to one another's stories. We hope eventually to have a significant chapter there in France at some stage. We're developing all around the world. We're in South Africa, we're in Nigeria, we're in Colombia, we're in Mexico, we're in the United States, we're in Limerick. One of the things that we're trying to do is scuff up the world a little bit, saying it's not that simple, come into my world and try to understand it a little differently. That's what listening is very much about.
I'm going to hit you with a quote from Nick Cave. Kind of doing this.
What's so funny about, is that what it is? Is it?
No.
Is that the quote?
No. But I'm impressed that you can quote Nick Cave. I'm kind of asking this as a writer to just get a bit of advice as well, because we're aware of this. There's a certain constriction in terms of what we can say. And in some ways that's healthy, and in some ways it's very unhealthy. So he said an interesting thing recently. He said, political correctness has grown to be the unhappiest religion in the world. Its once honorable attempt to reimagine our society in a more equitable way now embodies all the worst aspects that religion has to offer and none of the beauty. Moral certainty, self-righteousness, shorn even of the capacity for redemption.
Yeah. I mean, the song that I was going to quote that Nick Cave wrote and Elvis Costello made famous is, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? What he's talking about there in that quote is what we've been talking about for quite a lot here today. Is how do you excavate underneath the righteousness of it all? How do you go in and say we need to know one another? How do you get a Rami and how do you get a Bassam, who are not supposed to come together and through the force of their courage say that, and get called names and get called all sorts of terrible things. I'm a bit worried about calling it political correctness, because often the politically correct is correct. It's the application of the political correctness. It's the way that we say you must sort of do this, instead of allowing people to understand it, and to move through themselves. It's almost as if it's an application from the top down. Now, this is part of the problem. For centuries, decades, we've been applying things from the top down, as politicians, as corporations in particular, but even as artists, we sort of say, this is the way that you should think about it. No, it all has to come up from underneath. Everything it should be crowdsourced. And the way that people have a relationship to a book, the way a book takes off, and the way a book lasts and is true, is not if you get the National Book Award or the Booker Prize, whatever else it happens to be. It's if people actually read it and they start talking to one another, and this power is going to come up from underneath. And what Cave is talking about, he's entirely correct, but I wish, and I'm sure he does, because he's so super smart, brilliant person. We have to also acknowledge that we can't force these things upon anyone. And if we're not prepared to listen to what the other side are saying, we're in serious danger. So narrative 4, for example, we took kids from the South Bronx and from Kentucky. The kids from the South Bronx are all African-American and or immigrant, right? The kids from Kentucky are all white and or Cherokee Indian, right? They get together, they're terrified of one another because there's one girl here and, you know, she wears her hijab and, you know, she's from the South Bronx. And there's one boy here who drives a pickup truck who's got, you know, a rifle hanging in the back. And they come together and they seem like, you know, initially like creatures of a different planet. But like Rami and Bassam, by telling one another stories or stepping into one another's shoes and understanding one another, they begin to acknowledge, wow, that girl Farida who wears the hijab, she's got an earplug underneath. She's got her AirPods underneath, and she's listening to rap music. And that boy who has the pickup truck, you know, and the rifle actually needs to shoot a rabbit because his family's hungry. And once you get into those sort of messy areas, you think, ooh, maybe we could be messy together. And if we could be messy together, then this whole idea of political correctness is not so, narrow. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. We know that, but we have to sort of be big enough to understand that things that are right and wrong also have elements of each other. You know, and one of the things that I want to say is that everybody is, you know, seeing all this stuff that's going on in the United States right now. One of the things that I think is important to say is that there has been an infantilization of the American people, both from within, by themselves, whatever it happens to be, also by the political parties, also by the media. Honestly, things are much more scuffed than one would think. And there are a lot of intelligent, brilliant things going on, including some of these protests on the street where people are asking the right questions. And there is part of the American experience right now that is being disallowed because everybody wants to reduce it down to simplicities. I'm sure French people and Irish people sometimes feel the same way, but in particular, it's happening over here because you have certain people in charge. But I just want to say that the American people are not as stupid as their political parties seem to want them to be, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And you know, I see it with my own kids, and I see it on the street every day.
Yeah, take your question. I'll yeah.
I heard the question,
okay,
and it's a fantastic question, and but just for the recording, how do we sort of, I suppose, to summarize it, how do we get beyond the confusion or even harness the confusion in the world that we're living in? I think part of it goes back to how we treat our young people and our education. I was celebrating earlier my teachers in St. Bridget's National School. I know I would not be the person I am without those teachers right now. The idea that we are not spending money on our schools, whether they be in the wealthy areas or whether they be in the poorer areas, is entirely criminal to me. If we had an alien land down from outer space, they would be confused most of all by this, and that certain people get to have an education and others don't, as if it's almost as if there is a control, and there is a control going on here. There is an element that has a financial stake in keeping people down, in keeping people away from a form of truth. I think we have to have a revolution in our idea of who it is applying education. And I go to America, or used to go to American airports, and hear them out on the loudspeaker saying, anybody in military uniform, active military duty, please step up and go on with the first class passengers. Grand. I'm okay with that. I think it's good. Yes, these people are putting themselves on the line. I can't wait for the day that you show your union card and you're a teacher and you get on the plane and the bus for. So a revolution in our thinking about what it's going to happen at what I shouldn't call them but the ground elements. And in those ground elements, to allow this confusion to occur, to debate these things, because the classroom is probably the most democratic place that you will find. You think about your own classroom and then other places that you've been. I bet it was a pretty diverse sort of place, certainly in terms of economy and gender and all these sort of things. So I do think that one of the things that we have to do, and I'd like to ask Dara this. I mean, Dara, your teachers, do you remember their names, their faces, the things that went on in school, maybe even better than what you remember you did last night?
I gotta be honest, I wasn't one of those kids that had teachers that have, stayed within them for many years. I didn't find teachers were very engaged, which was my own particular experience.
There goes my theory.
Yeah, but I do agree with your theory in terms of teachers do change the world. That idea of, and I think we hit that for a little while in terms of frontline workers. Suddenly they were honored in the way that they should be, and should continuously be. I think some of that points towards our inability to pay attention in the longer term. We're kind of very short-term focused. So those weeks and even months where people in New York and people around the world are making noise at 7:00 in the evening and rattling out their windows, hailing and celebrating frontline workers. It's such an explosion of joy and truth and a beautiful moment. And very quickly we just dissipated in the media storm. It becomes, very quickly it becomes yesterday's news.
Yeah, I have to say that was one of my
fans, I think.
That's right, but that was one of my favorite moments. In March and April and all the way through May, people hanging out the windows, banging saucepans, people, like finally understanding, that these frontline workers, they were important. But other people had a vested interest in dividing us. I can't wait for the voice to come along. I don't know who she will be. I bet it's a she. I bet she's going to be young, like a Greta Thunberg, and she's gonna wake us up out of our stupor. I think something. I have to believe something like that is going to come along. Yeah, so the question is about writing and researching, and at what point did it, did I stop researching and start writing? Well, initially I had to do a lot of research. So I went across there. I thought about it. I went across there again. I made 3 quick visits. One, I went with Narrator 4. One, I went with Palestinian Literary Festival. One, I went on my own and started to gather things, walk around. I got onto Rami's motorbike and I drove with Rami through the streets. I got into the car, walked through checkpoints with Bassam, and got a fairly good lay of the land, and then came back and started to write. But with this particular book, the process of research continued all the way along, because one thing tips to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. And part of it was about my crazy brain. And then part of it was also about trying to get that symphonic thing going, so that this could be a vast symphony. Thinking at times, okay, I need to get into nature now. Oh, I need to get into the air now. Oh, I need to get gritty now. All of these sort of things. So that so much of it felt emotional. So much of it felt like it was a gut feeling. It's like Dara, occasionally plays in a band. It was very much like being a musician and thinking, right, we got a session going on here. Time for a little bit more mandolin or a bit less. It felt very, very much like that. So I was surprised by the novel. I have to tell you this too. And I had no idea how I was going to finish it. I won't tell you how I finish it, but I was very happy with how it eventually finished. But I didn't finish it until I finished it, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this novel like right up and if I show you early drafts, actually, Dara, you have an early draft there in your in your living room. It's very close to what the end product happened to be. So I didn't take all these stories, drop them, and start to move them around. It was always very intentional what I was doing.
It's also one of those books. Sorry to take away from people's questioning time. A thing that really struck me is it's one of those books that doesn't work at all until it does. Like very often you can write something and like you'll do 20 pages and they're not bad, and then you're like, okay, well maybe I have to throw away another 10, but then you do another 20. Like you can kind of build from the ground up. This doesn't work until it did, right? It's a total cards.
Yeah, I sort of knew that, that's why part of it was terrifying. But my son John Michael, I wish he was here. He became my reader very funnily. My father died, and just shortly after my father died, I started writing this book. And my son John Michael walked into my office and said, "Dad, can I read this book that you're working on?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And then I suddenly realized, oh my gosh. Father, son, father, like things passing on. And I gave it to him and he read the first 25 pages. He says, "Dad, I've got to tell you, I'm really confused." And then he came in the next night and he said, "But that's exactly what I had to be. I had to be confused." And he was the one who sort of alerted me to the surrender element that I was going for. It's a very risky gambit at the start of a novel. And I know there are plenty of people who will throw it away after 20, 25 pages. However, I think that I might have planted things in the back of the brain that think, well, maybe I should go back there because those birds were interesting, or those things that. And so hopefully it works in that way. Can I just say to my publishers and my editor Caroline and Diane and everybody at Belfond, how crazy brave they were to call it Apeirogon in French, which is actually much sexier in a French accent than it is in an Irish accent.
As pretty much all words are.
Yeah, Apeirogon, but it really is. But that took a tremendous amount of bravery to do that, and so I think hopefully it matches the spirit of the book, because the spirit of the book was trying not to acknowledge my bravery, but Rami and Bassam's bravery.
Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to say, I think we take flight with birds, and we fly into your book. And sometimes we coast, sometimes we go skyrocket high, like when a draft comes along, or else we fall, and we take a side trip and we sit and we look, and it's a real experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that's when your readers come in. Thank you. That's when your readers come in and teach you something about the experience. But one of the things that it was very important to me was the pattern of birds. And so when you go to that corridor in Israel and Palestine, where the birds are flying over, the birds are coming from Algeria, South Africa, Ireland, Sweden, France, and all these things. And one of the reasons that I wrote about Francois Mitterrand was because I was on the hillside in Beit Jala at the bird sanctuary, and they'd captured a tiny little songbird in one of the mist nets. Like this songbird was about as big as your thumb. And they freed the songbird from the net there in front of my eyes. And I suddenly just remembered, oh, I had read somewhere years ago about Francois Mitterrand's last meal. And so and everything began to click and click and click and click. And then I began to realize, well, we're all here and we're all there. We're all part of the Abir and Smadar story. And you're exactly right. And I thank you for it, because really I want people to fly in from everywhere and to land, if even just for a little while, and discover not the story about Israel and Palestine, but the story of Rami and Bassam.
Just wanted to go back to the writing of the book. How do you know you're finished, And how do you feel when you're finished? Do you feel empty? Do you feel relieved? Or do you feel, I don't know? And when do you know that's it?
Again, it's just, you're like a musician. It's that you've done it. That's it. Got it. That has to be there. When you're finished, it's, are you going towards a finish? It's incredibly euphoric. Whenever I finish a book, then I think no one's going to read it. I'm a fraud. I'm a charlatan. I managed to do this one, but I'll never do another one. Your energy is totally spent, totally exhausted, and then you start to build up again. Yeah, and nothing is ever truly finished. I mean, you could keep going back to something again and again and again, but at a certain stage, you have to say, I got to the place that I want to go, and now it's time to move on.
Do you want to tell us the story about ending Dancer? That's quite a good story. I quite like that.
So I was writing Dancer, and I had all these voices in Dancer, and I was about to have a big coda at the end where every single character was going to get in, and I was there, and I figured I had about 2-3 months left to write, and I said, okay, I'm going to do a thing about Nureyev coming down the staircase. And Nureyev was coming down a staircase, and he started to come down this circular staircase, and I saw him as he moved down the staircase, and then I realized, wow, that's kind of part of the Yeatsian gyre that I've been part of, and that is where the novel ends. And it ended one morning when I still thought I had 2 or 3 months at least left to work, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was an amazing thing.
I love the idea of a surprise ending even to its author.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm also jealous because I'd love my book to just end out of nowhere.
Well, what I want to tell everyone, and I please, I want you to go out and get all that solid melts into air. Go, comment en français? What's the title in French?
C'est tout qui est solide dessous dans l'air.
Oh, very nice. But everybody should go out and read that, and I can't wait for Dara's next book to come. Do you have a title of the next one yet?
Yeah, I'm going to call it Remembrance Sunday.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. I like that.
There you go.
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, soon. We're getting there. I'm close.
Hey, one last thing. I know that we're getting close on time, but a lot of good things happening in Irish literature. A lot of young writers coming along and kicking over the buckets and doing good things. Fertile times for especially young women in Ireland who are writing like fantastic stuff.
Yeah. And people are reading them. That's the other thing. It's I mean, you can have fertile times where, the reputation of the literature of the country is enhanced, but actually people really are reading them, which is really great.
Yeah. I would like nothing more than to be able to go out for a glass of wine with everyone there now tonight. That would be a bit of fun.
On that note, can I thank our audience here in the Centre Culturel for being with us tonight, masked as we are, and also to future audiences who will see us online. I had the pleasure of reading extracts from Dara's future novel, Remembrance Sunday. Just even hearing the title, I'm already moved by it. I was there to fact check some of the Emma Skillen.
Nora did a very nice fact checking job for me.
But thank you both so much for a most moving, insightful, generous, deep, and simply fantastic conversation. Thank you both so much. And Dara, you'll be coming back. Will be for the launch of your novel by Belfond, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
We hope to welcome you sometime very soon in the flesh. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say thank you to the audience too?
Thank you, everybody, for showing up. That's kind of amazing that you did that.
Yeah. Can we just say that so that they all hear the fact that they showed up on this particular night and we're so far away? It really moves me. I am really moved by the fact that you guys came along. So thank you so much.